No mai, hare mai, kia koto katoa, ko Eric Kennedy aho. I'm Eric Kennedy, a poet, critic, and editor. Welcome everyone watching to this online reading and panel discussion celebrating A Kind of Shelter, Whakaruru-taha, edited by Witty Hemaira and Michelle Elvey and published by Massey University Press. This is a fascinating book. It's a different book. It's very rooted in Aotearoa, but the roots grow up and then there's this great big canopy of lovely branches extending out across the seas. I thought the press had some really good copy about it that I'll just share to give people watching a sense of what the book's like in case you don't know, in case you want to go out and get it after this, which you very well might. So this is eminent writers thinking about a better world. 68 writers and 8 artists gather at a hui in a magnificent cave-like dwelling or meeting house. In the middle is a table, the tepu korero, from which the rangatira speak. They converse with honored guests, and their rangatira korero embody the tahuhu, the overarching horizontal ridgepole of the shelter. In a series of rich conversations, those present discuss our world in the second decade of this century. It's not 2000 anymore, I always forget that. They look at things like decolonization, indigeneity, climate change, and this is what they see. Now, what I said, so I got the book a couple of weeks ago, and I was just really blown away a bit by it, and sent an intemperate sort of like fanboy email to Michelle and Witty, and I'll just read what I said at the time. Forgive the gush here, but I got my copy of A Kind of Shelter, Whakaruru-taha today, and man, it's something. Gorgeous for a start, so it's a great advert for the art of bookmaking. Nice one, Massey. But more importantly, so alive with thought and energy, beautiful, unconfinable, dangerous, like a swan in a car. I had other work to do, but there I was, reading and dog-earing. In the way that supposedly the sculptor sees the statue that was already in the stone, I feel like you, the editors, saw a version of Aotearoa literature that no one else had quite seen yet, and brought it out. So it's excellent, it's forward-looking, and it's vital. So let's meet some of the contributors to this exciting volume. We have 7 of them here today to read and or take part in a discussion. And they are, first of all, Gina Cole, would you just like to introduce yourself to those watching?
Tēnā koutou katoa ni Sambula Vanaka, ko Gina Cole tōku ingoa. My name is Gina Cole. I am of Fijian and Pākehā descent. I write fiction, non-fiction, poetry, flash fiction, short fiction. My most recent publication was last year, a science fiction fantasy novel called Naviro, which is Fijian for the whirlpool. And it's in a genre which I call Pacifica Futurism.
Oh. Love the creation of new genres. Let's all be doing that. Could have more genres in the world. Next, Faisal Ahmed. Say who you are and what your work is like.
Kia ora, everybody. My name is Faisal or Faisal or Faisal, many different pronunciations on it. I grew up here in Auckland, but I was born in Baghdad, Iraq, where I spent my first couple of years. Moved over to Auckland in the mid-90s and sort of did the usual immigrant thing of growing up in a community here in Balmoral, Mount Albert, with all sorts of big melting pot of New Zealand society. I, for my sins, work as a lawyer full-time, but in between I do writing. I've done a couple of pieces of writing in the past couple of years, most recently also with Michelle for an anthology of writing called Ko a Te Reo Toto, which was about sort of New Zealand national identity, especially after the March 15 attacks. And my writing sort of is non-fiction essays, like the piece that's in this collection as well. So really lovely to be on this panel.
Thank you. These are great introductions. Like, people are genuinely getting a sense of what people's work is like. Thanks so much, everyone. Next, Rianna Robinson. Tell us about yourself.
Yes, kia ora, ko Rianna Robinson. Tōku ingoa, he te mai te whanga aho. Engari, I wanted to share a poem actually that I loved when I was quite young in order to give a sense of, you know, where I am coming from. And that is, I want to mention also, thank you, big thank you to Michelle, big thank you to you. It's really lovely to be here. But yeah, a big thanks to Steele Roberts for my very first volume, which was Owe Rona, dealing with the mythology of the woman in the moon. And then Whakaruru Press published my second volume, which was Her Limitless Her. But I'm always trying to write words that someone wants to run off with. I love it when I find a poem that grabs me like that. And when I was a kid, I had the Robert Graves poem. It is, I know it off by heart, as when the young birdcatcher swept off his tall hat to the squire's own daughter, so let the imprisoned larks escape and fly, singing about her head as she rode by. And there's, of course, marvelous poems that you want to run off with all the time, like the Tamir Rice poem by Carlo Miller, the fabulous, I want to write a poem about Gaza, the Tusiata Lia. There's just so many things that jump to mind, but that's what I'm always trying to do. And I think that poetry is, like art, it offers a different time frame. Like, we get these news bites, we get some ideas, we want to write poems about them, which is what I like to do. Like, be in the present, talk about injustice, the brutality of this mad world that we live in. But what a poem does, which is different, is it gives us a completely different time frame. This is not a new idea, obviously. Olivia Laing has been writing about that in a book about painting. But anyway, so I just wanted to share that. I think that's probably enough for now.
Yeah, thanks. Introducing yourself and saying a poem is the way I'm expressing, you know, my sense of self in work is awesome. I love that. Next, giving us a sense of self in work, Ian Weddy. Ian.
Kia ora katoa, ko Ian Weddy, aho. I'm the old bugger here. And so it's not so surprising that I will say I've written an awful lot over the period of time that I've been writing. Quite a large part of my life has been involved in writing for a living. So I've written a great deal of what's often called occasional stuff. Essays I've written for magazines here and elsewhere in the world. On a regular basis for magazines like The Listener here and newspapers. But really more important to me has always been writing novels, of which I've written quite a few, and writing poetry, which is probably the most mysterious one, and the one that doesn't just happen when you want it to, which is what I do like about it. It's a form of writing that offers resistance. And I think the reason I love poetry above all other forms of writing that I engage with, and maybe in a way all other forms of writing that I read, is that it's immensely diverse. It can be a great many things. It can be the Gilgamesh. It can also be a little William Carlos Williams poem, a perfect little poem. So much depends upon a red wheel barrow beside the white chickens. And I think that what I really have been grateful for, having a life in writing, is being able to live in a world where that amount of diversity and that amount of surprise and that amount of reinvention is constantly what I experience. So I count myself a very, very lucky person to have had that and to have lived in that world with all of that.
I feel like diversity, surprise, reinvention could be like a strap line for a kind of shelter. Yeah, that's well put.
Certainly true of the book.
Yeah. Laura Jean McKay, nice to meet you. Tell the audience what you do.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I am Laura Jean McKay, and it's so lovely to be here. I'm speaking to you from Meanjin, Brisbane. So I say Galang Naru Windawu in Turrbal language and Garamba Bigi in Yagara language. I've also lived for a time as a Tau Iwi in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, and I'm married to the writer Tom Doig, who is of course from Wellington. So I have very loving connections to both countries, and I'm sort of making it my mission in my very slow way to try to bridge the ditch and to try to get authors from this continent and from Aotearoa together in spaces like this. Not that I've done any of this work today, but I love the fact that I was included in today. So thank you so much. Even though my background is humanitarian, both in my work and my writing, I've increasingly been turning to ecological concerns and writing more and more about human and non-human animal relationships. I write short stories and novels, and I'm finding that the characters in my novels and my short stories are increasingly sort of turning away from that human centrist idea of fiction, especially being all about humans and the human condition and all else being metaphors for that, and turning towards a place where other entities and beings and animals are centralized in the text and working out what they might do in different scenarios. Chaos and love and climate change and all the things that we're facing today and tomorrow.
Yeah, your piece in the book definitely deals with the sort of numinous qualities and agency of land, for example. Yeah, I want to for a bit. Michelle Elvey, I forgot to introduce you. Michelle, tell us who you are and what you do.
Kia ora.
If we have enough
Tēnā
time
koutou
today.
katoa. Thank you, Eric. It's really wonderful to have you take us through this conversation and introduce everybody. I think I'm not the last one. I think we also still have,
David.
other. Okay, so as I do a lot of work as editing. With editing, I do an awful lot of anthology work. I think I've edited anthologies with a lot of with other anthologies that include people in the room as well. For me, a lot of that anthology work is incredibly important because it's a way to bring together a set of voices that maybe they haven't had an opportunity to be in a collection together or even talk to each other. And I find a lot of times that in a collection, whether it's fiction or poetry or nonfiction or all of the above with artwork as well, as we see in this volume, there's a new way of looking at a single piece. And I really love that. I always believe that, the whole is greater than the individual parts. And what happens when you look at something as a whole and you have all these voices, it's a little bit like a microcosm of a world. And I love that. And I think it creates a really generous space for every contributor to be saying something and also listening. And for me, that anthology work, I think, in a way, I suppose, is a little bit of my own mission. As a writer, a lot of my writing ends up focusing around the sea because I came to New Zealand on the sea. I sailed here with my own sailboat in 2008, arrived. So New Zealand is my home, and I love it that I get to call this my home. Yeah, a lot of my work ends up thinking a lot about our relationship, the relationship between people and land and ocean, and how the ocean sustains and carries all of us. And increasingly, that's more and more where a lot of my own writing is going. I tend to write short works. I have yet to write a novel, but I write a lot of short story, short fiction, and poetry, also creative nonfiction essays. And I like the way all of those things sort of end up speaking to each other, as far as I'm concerned. So thanks for the opportunity to be here with you, also as a contributor to the book, and also to be able to sit back and listen to everybody share their own experiences. It's really wonderful.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you. Many thanks to you. And our final panelist, I'd say he needs no introduction, but he's going to give one anyway. It's David Eggleton. You're muted, David.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Yeah, Maori. My name is David Eggleton. I'm living in Otipoti, Dunedin, and I work as a reviews editor for Landfall at the moment. I'm also busy putting together an anthology of Pacifica poetry from Aotearoa, New Zealand. And as well, of course, I'm a poet and writer who's been working away for a very long time at these activities. And my main interest, I suppose, is in self and place, and placelessness, and trying to locate a kind of a narrative or storyline that I can figure in terms of where I am at any given time. So I write out of this location, and I kind of write for different communities and different genres. So I'm sort of interested really in the challenges that writing offers. And so this particular poem that I contributed to this anthology sprung out of the fact that I was poet laureate. It was just sort of an official position which allowed me to kind of write these semi-official or public poems. So this is my poem in this anthology is really part of that cycle of poems about the pandemic, and it's kind of changing form as it metamorphosed from one thing to another thing. And we're sort of not quite in the post-pandemic era, but we're kind of searching for a way out of the pandemic at the moment. So I'm very interested in what that might mean in terms of writing and as a phenomenon, as something to explore as a writer. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks, David. And I'll just very quickly say, because I'm also a contributor to the book. I'm Eric Kennedy. I don't often think of myself as an immigrant exactly, but I am, and definitely like that's people who came to this country are an essential sort of voice in a kind of shelter, Whakaruru-taha. I've been here since 2013. My poetry often concerns itself with the depredations of late capitalism, with climate breakdown, and with the mirth to be found in human folly, I guess. You have to look on the funny side of things. Yeah, that's everyone. And now we're going to hear from 6 of the contributors, sort of a self-contained piece if it's not too long, or an excerpt of it. And then after that, we'll have a discussion about various things that came into our heads whilst hearing each other, or whilst reading the book, or whilst thinking about the many issues the book tackles. So we're going to go in the same order that we met people in. So Gina Cole, would you like to read something for us?
Sure. This is, I'm going to read the first part of my contribution to this anthology, and it's a short story called The Lifeboat. Boombu told me a seed grows from destruction. The idea lay dormant in my brain, buried in a neural substrate where she'd planted it until the ferry incident. The ferry incident destroyed me in one way. Big ships terrify me now. In another way, it led to my love of Ndrua, double-hulled canoes. Boombu can steer Ndrua by the stars, the sun, birds, and currents. On the day of the ferry trip, she hesitated on the gangplank, studied the sky. There's a storm coming. I just wanted to get on board and sail across the strait to see my cousin's sister. I spotted the captain at the top of the ship, also examining the sky. A maritime hat shaded his eyes against volt grey light. Halfway across the strait, gale force wind and driving rain whacked into the side of the ferry. Someone shouted through a squealing intercom, "Put on your orange life jackets." The ferry heaved up the face of a huge wave, smashed down the other side and capsized. Seawater crashed through the windows. Boombu grabbed me, pulled me into the rush, bubble, choke, freeze, shock, pain, blackout. I woke inside the sea, a blue monster on my chest, my legs ballerina, eyes drill, ears drill, eyes speckle, arms claw, shut down. I choked free, coughing seawater in the open. The freezing ocean tossed me about like a dead fish. Boombu held on, tethered me to her waist with thick rope. I was bone cold, gasping for air as wave after wave hit me in the mouth. The captain's face appeared above the swells, his hat pulled tight onto his head, sticking to him, even in big water, even in howling wind and needle spray rain. He grabbed Boombu's hand, dragged us both alongside into the lifeboat. I crawled into a corner, sodden and cold, and collapsed into a dream of frozen silk sheets. Fiery sunlight woke me. My eyelashes were rimed with salt, like bees' legs laden with pollen. Someone splashed water in my face. "Drink." I gulped from a tin cup. The captain held to my lips. "Boombu." I scrabbled about on hands and knees, the bulky life jacket scratching my skin. I found Boombu lying unconscious on the deck. Her chest rose and fell in easy rhythm. I took her hands in mine and rubbed them warm. "Boombu, wake up." "She's been out for a while." The captain proffered a pudgy hand in my direction. A silver-wrapped chocolate bar lay on his upturned palm. I took it, stared at him, dumbfounded. "She'll come around." Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Yeah, and you'll have to get this to hear the rest of what people are doing if you don't hear the entire thing. I do recommend it. Yeah, your piece is a sort of almost an allegory about a shipwreck in knowledge and responsibility and stewardship, and I'm a big fan. Next, how about we hear from Faisal Halabi?
Cool. Well, I've written a nonfiction piece in here, so I'll just read the first sort of page and a bit from it, just conscious of time. So this is called Hazel Avenue. About almost halfway down the middle of Auckland's Dominion Road sits a cul-de-sac called Hazel Avenue. At the bottom of it is a reserve, at the top of it a collection of shops, and in between is where my family's new life in Aotearoa, New Zealand began. I can still remember exactly our first journey to that street in the 90s, all of us sitting in a taxi van, driving under the bright sun, turning left from the Mount Roskill end of Dominion Road, and my uncle, who had arrived in the country a few months earlier, waiting there to welcome us. My dad had about $5,000. My mother could barely string a word of English together. I was 6 years old and my brother had just turned 2. We were 15,000 kilometers away from home, and it was uncertain what would come next, but we were here. 26 years later, and New Zealand has, along with much of the global community, endured so much. The war on terror and its collateral, the rise of disinformation and conspiracies, Trumpism, Brexitism, climate change, the COVID pandemic, our first ever and second ever terrorist attacks in Aotearoa. In early 2022, we watched as protesters gathered at Parliament with flags flaunting messages ranging from violence against the Prime Minister to American presidential election campaign material. It makes for a painful list, each event lurching New Zealand closer to a cliff edge of uncertainty, each event asking us to make a choice as to how to respond. Throughout all this, New Zealand has become home to my family and I. I love this place, I'm proud to be a part of its present, and I'm excited to grow with it into the future. But at this point, after 2 years of the pandemic and as a hangover from all the other events the country has had to endure, things feel uncertain. Uncertainty gives way to division and conflict. As an immigrant child growing up during this period, when faced with uncertainty, one response was to look inwards for comfort and push away everything else. The strength of my parents and family during that time taught me that differences exist. Acknowledging them and finding the common ground are the tools for responding to them. Letting them wash over you is not. As New Zealand looks to the future, the tools for responding to today's uncertainties are in finding and building on the common ground we do have, rather than giving power to that which we don't. It's a lesson that I began to learn from my parents the moment I got out of that taxi on Hazel Avenue. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks so much. Yeah, I think your work, that it engages with memory, but also with like the incredibly messy and toxic political present. It's not the only piece in the book to do that. And that's one of the things that's exciting to me about the book is that sometimes we talk about politics in a kind of guarded or metaphorical way. And sometimes it's just like, no, here's how it is. And the book has both kinds of pieces, and it needs it too. So thank you. Next, we'll hear from Rianna Robinson. You're on mute, Rianna, sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. It's perfect to follow on from Faisal because I wanted to start off quoting Cornel West, who is, is doing interesting stuff in the States right now. He has done all his life. He says today, be serious in your quest for truth and beauty and goodness and land where you land, which is to say, be unique and singular, have the courage to be yourself. And I would add, as Faisal just mentioned, find common ground. I think Api Taylor remarks more than once in his conversation, Kororo, he says there's only one race. It's the human race, which, for me connects in with all we are saying is give peace a chance. And when one of our moko was about 9 or 8, he said, we must keep trying because the world is now. I'd just like to say all of that, and before I actually go on with my piece that was selected, and I'm very happy to say that this beautiful cover and beautiful artwork further in, this one here, from our artworks by our daughter. Anyway, here we go. Rianna Robinson reading Inside, Outside. Inside, what to see? A swift transition to an iPhone she's holding. Holy cow, the latest Bollywood images. The iPhone belongs to a random fighter, 17 years old, door kicked in at 3 a.m., dragged off his mattress by death dealers, mother and sister shoved, shamed, foreign-trained Afghani humiliate him to life ever after. And the returned soldier tweets after handing him over, after opening his phone, how she hates this war, this nonsensical war. And she tweets, "No more pretending it meant anything. It didn't. It didn't mean a fucking thing." Outside, what to see? Let's start with the rusted trailer, still in use. Chooks resting in its shade. The shadow cast is short right now. It's late morning on the South Pacific coast, far from towns and villages. The sea clasping a quiet sky, filling half the picture. The chooks beginning to get in the zone, dazed and post-coital, conjuring an egg into te ao marama. Kia ora.
Thank you, Rianna. I love that the piece sets up this juxtaposition between the peace we enjoy here and the not so peaceful things that happen elsewhere. And it's like, there's a really big implicit question about, are we enjoying this because others have to? Anyway, that's maybe a discussion about how capitalism always offshores problems, essentially. And thank you for mentioning the korero in the book. So there are all these discussions between usually two, sometimes more participants about various issues, and they're really fascinating. And to me, like a real point of difference, a USP for this book. Other books don't necessarily have, half a dozen, 6 to 10 page discussions between serious artists on important issues. That's a really great thing to bring up. Ian Weddy, would you like to share something from the book? You may be on mute still.
Are you talking to me?
I said Ian.
Oh, sorry,
Ian,
I didn't hear. I don't think.
Could you unmute, Ian? I think you're muted. Ian, can you hear me? Because if you can, you need to unmute yourself. Is that?
How's that?
Yes.
Aha. I don't know what happened there, except that I got muted. Well, this is a poem called Treehouse, and it's about a tree that I can see if I look to my right out the window of this office. Changes through the seasons. At the moment, it's almost leafless, but it's full of an extraordinary weight of yellow berries. I don't know what it's called. I don't know its name, its botanical name, which is shameful. So I need to do some work there. Anyway, here's the poem. The stroppy, garrulous, flighty inner city dwellers assembling around the leafy tree outside our window, or else under the shelter of the barber shop eaves over the road, or along the work-stained footpath outside Car-Tune Auto, whose insistent radio cannot compete with their chitter-chatter, nor ever quell their flirty displays, impervious to the testosterone gear shifts of souped-up racers, daring orange up at the lights with jervoice, tolerant to the point of oblivious to the plodding, nodding pigeons who share their asphalt and shade, their sun and rain, and the insistences of their persistent young who flutter and need to be noticed and fed beyond need, except the need to be there too when dusk announces the sweet hour of gathering in the fading light beneath the tree, where we scatter the bowl of leftover rice and torn up crusts of stale bread, a meager charity, but good enough to summon the miscellaneous inner city survivors, the bright-eyed, beak-stropping crowd of sparrows, of course, and the pigeons, yes, but also the dapper, black-necked miners, their mates, the mouthy Aussie magpies, and from time to time, a pair of show-offy rosella. On the roadside, beneath their leaves they gather, these quick, talky flaneurs, nifty acrobats of air, branch grippers and asphalt hoppers, feasters upon scraps, the lone tree outside our place, their forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. The note that I wrote for myself about this poem was an even-song poem of urban avian diversity and flourishing.
Yes.
And I'm like, it's like, you know, well, the bird world has been used as a metaphor for, you know, like the Parliament of Fowls by Chaucer or something.
well,
like, so I feel like your poem
boy,
sort of
they're
does
there
that
with
as
the
well.
boy races. That's the thing.
Next, we're going to hear from Laura Jean McKay.
Kia ora. I'm like Gina, I'm reading a short story called Come and See It All the Way from Town. I'm really fascinated by the way that creative writing can stretch and compress time within a single sentence or over a whole work. And I wanted to explore that through a character, and I was thinking about rocks and how what a rock sense of time might be and how they might express that. Back down the hill, I told Sam that our dog Jacko could suddenly talk. I didn't say I'd also seen Sam in the valley with their crops, torchlight flashing around, not very stealth. Sam grinned at me, red-eyed from the couch, said, of course he can, and started singing on top of Old Smoky until Jacko reluctantly wrinkled his lips, wailed along too. But I heard Jacko say, what's up? I yelled over them. What's up with you? What's up with you? Sam jostled Jacko's ears until the dog moved away. Actually, he just said what? I said. Sam squinted at me, got up and shut the door because Dad was out on the porch with his lights and notebook. A spotter was Dad. You think Jacko said it? Well, it's not like I saw his lips move or anything, I said, but for me, it was bloomin'. Like swearing, Jacko? Sam shook their head. Jacko wasn't even there that time. We wanted to camp up on the hill. Sam had done a survival course last autumn that I was apparently too young for, so they knew how to pack a tent, a mat, a cooker, and the best food like cans and things, how to replace the wool blankets with camphor-smelling sleeping bags. Dad nodded approvingly from his chair. The sun was doing some late afternoon things, so he didn't need a spotlight for a direct view to the rocky top. Take lamps, lots of lamps, Dad said. I said, got it, and pushed Sam out of the way. I was going to drive that damn quad at least. It's not a competition, Sam said, climbing on the back with extra torches and headlamps. I whistled. Jacko pretended not to hear me, but when I started the quad, the dog jumped up and settled next to Sam. Sam yelled how I should go the goat track because of all the gear. I took the lip. They swore and clung on when we tilted over the top, but then got to see how great a spot it was. I switched off the bike. The voices were immediate. Jacko? Sam shushed me. The seat was so comfortably warm with Dad's bum dents, I didn't want to leave anyway. Sam seemed contented on the back under the gear too. Wind hummed around us. Jacko started digging the base of the nearest rock. Sam edged off the bike to where Jacko was muttering away. That dog's been pretending he can't talk this whole time, I called, but Sam pressed close to the rock. Up. I climbed off the quad, muttering how I wasn't a dog. Sam looked at me. That was the word. What? Up. The rock said, turn it up. The rock said, turn it up? Sam nodded, listening still. I wriggled into the small ditch Jacko had made, face against the stone, scratchy, freezing, my ear cold and my steadying hand. Sorry, I should have mentioned that was from the middle of the story, just to, keep things difficult.
Vitally, people who don't have the book won't know what happened. So it's just a bit of a spur to find out what happened. Yeah, and animals, of course, do talk, as far as I'm concerned. I'm reasonably convinced of that, so I'm not sure that there's any reason to think that the Earth doesn't also. And the final panelist we're going to hear from before we have a bit of korero of our own is David Eggleton. David.
Euro. The theme, I was told that one of the themes of the anthology was based around the concept of tomorrow. Tomorrow is such a nebulous word. You can pour all kinds of things into it. So I thought I'd have a go at that with this poem. So it really springs out of that single kind of word, kind of concept, which is tomorrow. Tomorrow, every now and then, the world might end, but we will carry on. Tomorrow, the whistle blows for the start of the week, and that's where you come in. Tomorrow is tomorrow in aroha and sorrow. Tomorrow is the spice paladin's heated aromas. Tomorrow is the green flag of hills above windowsills. Tomorrow is petals, bright and proud on magnolias. Tomorrow, everything goes in the rumpus room. The spillage, the abandoned card game, the unemptied ashtray, the sticky whiskey glass. Tomorrow is golden chimes lighting up the lemon tree. Tomorrow is wild mountain hail and snow gentle to sea level. Tomorrow is tomorrow in all its iridescence and mesmeric beauty. Tomorrow I got your back and I want to hold your hand. Tomorrow we go as inseparable comrades through the years. Tomorrow we'll press you to coal and then to rough diamond. Tomorrow the world is as blue as an orange. Tomorrow the world is going micro. Tomorrow each of us will follow backwards, sweeping the trail clean with a branch. Tomorrow, see you on the flip side, sister in vinyl. Tomorrow from drist, rain will dringle and drumble to form evanescent balms, rinses and vapours. Tomorrow, more bafflegab, gobbledygook, bumph, officialese, taradiddle and blatteration. Tomorrow, never given, never, and nothing ever given except to accede to sense and deeds of honour for the sake of others. Tomorrow, out of black, ka awatea, daybreak, the ocean immense, eels crossing dark waters, and above, a mollymawk's glide, tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. David, with your piece, I feel like it's almost impossible not to hear the echoes of the Macbeth tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech. All our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Maybe that's the segue into a discussion about the kind of like heavy terrain we're treading here, all the contributors to this book, because it is a book that deals with turmoil, upheaval, misery, oppression, and trying to write things, both WRIT and write correct. So I circulated a few questions to have people think about before this, and hopefully people have got a chance to. And I'll start with one that I think I want to know the answers to all of these. I'm not just asking them just for the sake of it. So if we could unmute everyone, that would be a good start, Michelle. So the book is simultaneously local, like it very much is, but it's also international. So there are lots of international artist contributors, lots of issues that are not Aotearoa issues or are not just Aotearoa issues. So it's conscious of place, but it's also outward looking. So does anyone else get the feeling that it's the literary landscape of Aotearoa that's changing and not just the world?
They go together. I mean, you know, people write differently, not only to change the world, but because the world is changing. And I mean, people with long memories remember this happening, you know, when there was a thing called the Youth Revolution, when I was one of them. And it did change things. And it was brought about by a sense of old school having become oppressive in some way or limiting. And so there was a generation of writers who are now old, who thought of themselves as not only reacting to the state of the world, but also hoping to make a difference. Whether we did or not, of course, remains an open question.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, if I just jump in, I think you know the 1960s, they call it the decade that never dies. It was a decade of revolution, constant, ongoing. But looking back, what did it accomplish? Well, I think as Ian points out, we are constantly in a state of flux. Things are always changing, and we're always responding to this new time, as it were. And the pandemic is a definite period. But I was thinking while I was writing my poem, actually, that about 1922. So I was writing a poem in 2022, but 100 years earlier, we sort of consider that the beginning of modernism. You know, with T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland and James Joyce's Ulysses, and a whole lot of other events were happening. And they consider that, you know, a time of great turmoil and upheaval. And so every era has to address things in its own terms. I think the difference now is perhaps we've got more information, more knowledge. I mean, in 1922, New Zealand was very much a backwater and out of the loop, but now we're very much in the center of things. 2022, 2023, you know, nothing happens anywhere on the globe without us knowing about it almost instantly. And so we've got that kind of sense of freneticism, but also that kind of global anxiety and kind of apprehension and feeling that we are very much caught up in things. So when we talk about New Zealand landscape, it's actually part of a world landscape. And therefore, we're no longer isolated, we're no longer far-flung distant, we're very much in the center of things. And so that's something we're kind of registering in our writing, I think, at the moment.
I like that. Do other people feel like, because of various factors, cheaper travel, obviously information, that we're more at the center of things than we've ever been before? I mean, it rings true to me, but what do others think?
I think that's right. I think that the changes that are happening in New Zealand reflect changes that are happening in the world in a societal and political way. And our population is changing so much. We have growing numbers of immigrants, and I think there's a lot of Pacific Island and Māori writers and immigrant writers and queer writers who are being published now more than ever, and that I think is a growing trend worldwide. So I think that, yes, the literary landscape in New Zealand, in Aotearoa, is changing along with world changes.
Yeah, I'd actually like to add on to that, just in terms of a little background with the project. When Witty and I were first setting out and talking about this book, it grew out of an online project called Love in the Time of COVID. It was directly about COVID, responding to it, creating a creative online space for people to come together and share ideas and express themselves in creative ways, precisely in a moment when we all felt really restricted. So that happened in 2020. That's when we set up that project. And this book grew out of that. And it's interesting that David mentions that theme of tomorrow, because originally we actually thought about calling the book Tomorrow. I think a lot of you got really big, vague emails saying, let's write about tomorrow, which, of course, as you work on an anthology, you kind of meander through the topics and you realize that there's another title and there's another set of themes to look at. But tomorrow is certainly among those. And having said that, and following up what Gina's saying, I think one of the things we really wanted to do was see that this book is a book that is centered, comes out of New Zealand. And for Whitty and me working together, of course, what was really wonderful is that, he is from this land and I am new to the land, coming from across the sea too. There was something really beautiful about that relationship, and that's so much what New Zealand is like. And we had that idea that we wanted it to be a New Zealand book, but for the world, for us in New Zealand and for the world. And that's how that idea of the korero came up. We had the idea that we should be New Zealand talking to the world. Certainly in the pandemic, all eyes were on New Zealand with the way we were handling COVID. And we had a lot of attention, a lot of really positive attention. And so we really wanted to see, how does New Zealand, how do we talk to the world? And how do we enter that world stage and hold ourselves up, hold ourselves accountable, hold ourselves up, speak to each other. And again, coming back to that idea, the listening factor, which is that dialogue that we both felt was really strong and important in the book. Everyone here is a part of. So that I kind of following up on some of those themes and those ideas.
Something I'm interested in is, so like, I'm getting the sense that everyone thinks that writing here is different than it was before, and that it's maybe mirroring some other trends we see elsewhere. But one thing I do wonder about is, do people think that there's something that writers in Aotearoa are doing that sort of no one else is doing, or that no one else could do? And if so, what is it and why? Like, would it be because of Te Ao Māori influencing how people are working, or like, but I guess I'll just make it simple. And like, do people think that there's something happening here that is really only happening here?
In a way, I think it's true, but only in the sense that it's true everywhere. I mean, each place has its own individual characteristics. New Zealand has its, some of them have overlaps and aspects in common with other countries. But what I like is the sense of diversity, the differences in countries, the fact that there's so things we're doing here which may or may not be done elsewhere is in some ways the least interesting aspect of it. What's interesting is that it's different everywhere in one way or another. And, it encourages you to look out rather than look in when you're aware of difference elsewhere. I'm much more interested in what's happening elsewhere than what's happening here, in a sense, for those reasons, because it's constantly surprising and it's not familiar. And it makes you think twice about what it is that you're, becoming obsessed with, perhaps, in this country.
Yeah, it's like how going on holiday, it's not necessarily better than where you are, it's just different and eye-opening, and therefore you have a point of comparison that you didn't have before, and everything then can be reframed.
Yeah, and in the media world that we live in now, if you do what I do and browse, a variety of news channels every morning, it's a big, different, messed up place out there. And that's what's really fascinating to me.
Could I possibly go back to the original question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Which was more to do with, what can we make a difference? And I'd just like to, I'm reading a book at the moment, it's called Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency, which is by Olivia Lang. And the review, rather, of it is, she asks, is art resistance? Can you plant a garden to stop a war? It depends on how you think about time. If it depends on what you think a seed does, if it's tossed into fertile soil. But it seems to me that whatever else you do, it's worth tending to paradise, however you define it and wherever it arises. And it comes back to something that was mentioned earlier, which is community. It's like what Michelle is talking about listening, about engaging. It's about what she says is the work of art of which art is capable in the face of injustice is slow going. The news moves quickly. Cultivating a hopeful imagination takes time. To envision possibilities beyond what we already know requires a plausibility structure erected by sustained conversation in a community of others who are willing to listen, to have their minds changed, to peer out and glimpse what's taking place beyond what's already visible. Artist, poet, critic, and reader together in the looking. So, I mean, I also just want to say something else, and that is, I want to say how fabulous it is to meet someone who I admired from a distance, and to be on the same panel, and it's just magic. So I wanted to say that, and the same goes for others, but obviously I'm reading this right now. So yeah, that's, I think we need to think about that, and there's things, yeah, artwork and change, it takes time.
I love that, Rianna. One of the questions that I wanted to ask people, because I was hoping to steal their answers, because I get asked this, it's that, you know, Auden says poetry makes nothing happen. Well, does it? And it's like, I don't know. I never know what to say when I'm asked that. And I love what you brought in, that Olivia Laing text about sort of like tending your own patch of paradise and etc. Like on a time scale of, you know, a month, on a longer one. Yeah. How do other people feel about that? Because I feel like it's all leading to does art affect change or maybe not? What do other people feel about that? And feel free to bring in other examples. I love bringing in texts like that. Laura Jean. Oh,
I really love really love that reading of time. Thank you so much for bringing that to this Kōrero. I was really lucky to work at Massey University with Ingrid Horrocks a few years back, and we started an eco-writing course. And part of the idea around starting that course was that I think we felt that we needed to equip, or they were already equipped with the thoughts around what is happening in our rapidly changing world, but equip writers with the techniques and the craft skills to be able to respond to this rapid ecological and political and social change. And it was a really intense course. We divided the sections into themes like water, land and country, future, so that we could try to grapple with these concepts through themes that we were familiar with and very engaged with. And the students, the authors, just came up with the most brilliant work, and having that time together, having 6 months together to just go, here are some incredible texts, how do we respond to them, and how can we create works that might further or further explore this discussion.
I think we're getting close to running out of time, and I'd definitely like to hear from anyone who hasn't sort of contributed in the last little bit, but I'd like to close with a pretty simple but daunting question. I feel like this is a book that has a lot of hope in it, probably, but at the same time, there are some very cold, hard facts that could make us wonder if hope is something we can really hold on to. Are people optimistic about the future and what literature can do to make a better one? Anyone want to handle that very hot potato?
I just want to say thank you to Rianna for the shout out for my book. But also, as a science fiction writer, I am, yes, very excited about the future. And to go back to your last question, can art affect change? I think change is born in the imagination, and art is born in the imagination.
Yep.
And so they're kind of, change and art go together, I think. And I just want to quote one of my assessors. His name is Daniel Heath Justice. He's a queer writer from the Cherokee Nation, and he teaches Indigenous language at UBC. And he said that we cannot possibly live otherwise until we first imagine otherwise. And I think that's so true. I think that's the great thing about science fiction and fantasy. The ability to affect change comes about as a result of being able to imagine a different world, and change is born out of that.
I actually love that. I'm waiting to see if somebody else wants to jump in there, but I think that idea about change being an imagination is absolutely right, and I suspect that everyone intuitively has a sense of that. Everyone who is some kind of creative thinker or somebody who undertakes creative action. So whether your action is political or not, it is always about change of some sort. And what I loved about hearing some of the readings here and thinking about this book is that here we explored, you know, the earth and rocks and animals and other imaginings, as well as the hard-hitting topics. And I think that idea that whether it's in science fiction or whether imagining our own world and getting ourselves, I think it's Eric who talked about it, actually maybe in a previous panel even, the idea that we get outside of ourselves a little bit, and it's not just about the human experience, but the world experience beyond the human experience. So whether it's about animals, I always think personally we can take a really big lesson from elephants, because their sense of time is unlike anything else we know, elephants and whales. And, you know, there's a lot more of the world to explore and imagine in our own writings and our own dialogue, I think. So I really loved what you said there, Gina, and all these other conversations, the way they're flowing. So yeah, imagination.
I think Eric should really have the last word, and his last word in his story is, but everything was going to be okay.
Yeah, I think that was leavened with like several ladlefuls of irony there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I personally, as someone who's, you know, been involved in, you know, on the ground climate activism and stuff like that, like I have to resist like backpatting for like writing, and I know that activism and writing are not necessarily the same, and I think definitely there are other writers who will say that. Like I think Michaela Keeble's book from last year, Surrender, did a really good job of interrogating the sort of the difference between them and the responsibilities one has to sort of not do just one if one's capable of doing both. And I guess it's just about like sort of give what you can, whether that's intellectual time or time in like mutual aid or whatever. And yeah, but maybe I was correct in the story. Maybe everything is going to be okay. I'd love to end on that. Shall we end on that and say that everything's going to be, every little thing's going to be all right, kind of thing. Grand. Well, it's I'd like to thank everyone who's tuned in live and who's going to tune in when it's up on YouTube as a permanent link. The panelists you've been listening to are Gina Cole, Faisal Ahmed, Rianna Robinson, Ian Weddy, Michelle Elvey, Laura Jean McKay, David Eggleton. I've been Eric Kennedy. We've been talking about the book A Kind of Shelter, Whakaruru-taha, published by Massey University Press. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.